them. Joining me is the panel, Liberal Senator James Paterson and former Labor National President Warren Mundine, now with the Liberals. Warren, banning James Cook's replica ship 250 years later, fair enough?
I think it's a bit immature. You look at Cook. Cook was one of the great navigators of history. He sailed from England, he travelled for the South Pacific, he mapped areas, he did a whole lot of incredible stuff. And this idea that he comes out and rapes and pillages and that, well, that's just a load of rubbish. It's something that they need to acknowledge and celebrate in regard to the meeting of Captain Cook and the Maori groups there. Otherwise, when you look at it, where did the Westminster government come from, model in New Zealand? Where did a whole heap of other things come from? You know, you need to look at history and learn from the history. And there are some very good things about Captain Cook.
And also, James Paterson, isn't it the case, look, my knowledge of New Zealand history is not as great as I'd wish, but didn't the Maori tribes actually ask the British, willingly form a coalition with the British, form New Zealand in the Treaty of Waitangi to help them stop intertribal warfare, among other things?
Like you, Andrew, I don't claim to be an expert in New Zealand history and probably not enough of an expert to weigh into their history wars, but I can see some fairly strong parallels with our own debates about history in Australia. And what they essentially boil down to is, was it a good thing that Europeans discovered Australia? Was it a good thing that the British settled Australia? Now, I'm not saying for a second that we are a perfect country or that we have a perfect history, but on the ledger of history, I think you can say that the discovery and establishment of Australia as the modern nation that it is today is a net positive and something that's worthy of celebration and something that's important that we teach to our children and pass on to our children. And this idea that you can ban Captain Cook from your village or ignore the fact that he did circumnavigate New Zealand and Australia is a really silly notion that will just cheapen our understanding of our own history.
To something serious, Warren. Or more serious, lawyers for Cardinal George Pell have this afternoon confirmed he's appealing to the High Court against his conviction for abusing two 13-year-old choir boys, somehow at once and somehow in a busy cathedral and somehow without anyone noticing and somehow with the door open. Pell says that he's innocent, and a big focus of his appeal, I'm told, is the claim that the onus of proof was reversed, that he had to prove his innocence when the onus should have been on the prosecution to prove his guilt, to prove the very improbable accusations against him, which relied on the word of justice accuser. Now, I know there's probably not that much more we can say so far, but there really is this last legal chance, isn't it, to address what I think a lot of commentators are now suggesting was a miscarriage of justice.
Well, you're right. The High Court is the last appeal court that you can go to, and we'll see what happens over the next few days, the next few weeks in regard to whether they'll accept that appeal. Look, to me, I looked at the case, I've been following the case for a long time, and I look at the words of Justice Weinberg. They are very strong words. So I think that there is a case for the High Court to look at this. And there is a case...
Just for those that didn't pick up the reference, Justice Weinberg was the only one of the three judges in the Court of Appeal who said, look, this case against George Pell, no, it doesn't pass muster, strong suspicion that he's innocent. And Weinberg went through forensically, the only one of the three that had a long experience in criminal law, as to why the allegations didn't quite stack up for him at all. Yeah, sorry, but I interrupted you.
Oh, and that's true. He went through it very, very forensically, pulled it, and when you read it and you see him pull it apart, and you look at the other two judges, then that gives George Pell and his legal team, I think, a very good basis for that appeal. It is just really one word against another person's word. So is this how we base our legal system on now? There are some concerns in it. The High Court will look at it, the High Court will make its decision, and then we'll know where we go from there.
Now, James, obviously you're only a commentator, you're not in any position to influence anyone on the High Court, but Would you want the High Court to help bring some sort of new perspective to this? Because it's so highly contentious, this case.
Well, Andrew, I didn't attend the trial and I haven't followed the evidence, so I certainly don't want to substitute my judgment about the case for that of either the jury or the judges that considered it in the appeal. But I do think it is a good thing that we live in a country where people who are accused and even convicted of crimes have the opportunity to rigorously test the validity of the state's claims against them all the way to the High Court if necessary. Now, the High Court has to consider an application for leave that Cardinal Pell's legal team has made on his behalf, but if they do, he will have his final day in court at the High Court and have an opportunity to state his case. And I think that's a great thing about living in a country with the rule of law and a robust independent legal system.
Nicely dodged and weaved there, James, but I understand it's a very difficult, dangerous issue for people to get involved with. Look, Warren, here's something that really got my dander a bit today. Wage growth for Australian workers. It has been close to zero for some time now, zero after inflation. It's just incremental, tiny, tiny little shifts up if you're a public servant, maybe. But Victorian Premier Daniel Andrews and the state's and Victoria's other top 5 politicians, they've just got a pay rise of nearly 12%. The Premier got an extra $46,000. Do you think that's fair enough in a time when everyone else doesn't seems to have be having to tuck in their belt?
Yeah, it is. Look, I think politicians, should be paid a right amount of money, and it's good to see an independent, arbitrary group that actually looks at these things and makes these decisions. But when you're looking at the economy at the moment, that $46,000 raise for him is almost, what is it, $60,000 is the average salary in Australia. So look, it doesn't go down well. It doesn't look good, and now he's the highest paid premier in the country. So you got to, I'm with you on this, Andrew. It's a bit not, a bit of not.
It doesn't feel
well.
right. Mm-hmm. No, but James Paterson, is also rather ironic, isn't it? Here we have a socialist left premier snaffling another $46,000 of taxpayers' money from, well, it could go to the poor.
Andrew, I could make an unkind observation about the relative workloads of state MPs, but of course I wouldn't do that. I wouldn't reflect on my colleagues in that way. Generally speaking, Andrew, I'm a supporter of an independent system of setting the wages of politicians. I don't think we should be voting on our own wages. But having said that, when the Andrews government has a surprisingly sensible policy of a 2% wage cap for public servants, and this independent process delivers, in the case of the Premier himself, an 11-point-something increase in wages and 6-point-something% for ordinary MPs, I think it's going to, over time, undermine confidence in the system. If the system set up just keeps awarding big pay rises to politicians and no pay rises to anyone else, I think it's going to undermine public confidence, and I think that's a real problem.
No, I certainly think so. Just quickly, we almost ran out of time, Warren, but the Morrison government, I thought it was... I'm surprised to find it socialist itself, planning legislation that's going to let it force energy companies, force them to supply electricity at whatever terms the Treasurer sees fit, which could include the price, the quantity, whatever, for up to 3 years. I mean, I thought that was socialism. What's the Morrison government doing here?
Look, we've got a huge problem with our energy prices here. When you look at the legislation, when you're looking at what, even the breaking up of companies that in this space, when you've got a monopoly, what power do you have to control this monopoly? And that's virtually what they got. Now, the United States has similar laws in regard to, and they've used it in the past in regard to the Standard Oil Company and a number of other companies as well. And that's got to be the most... That's the way. That's the way that But it's sent a lot of fear through the whole industry in regard to how they should behave. And I'm a supporter of this actually because.
Okay, hang on. I've only got 10 seconds left over, so I just want James Paterson. Sure. James, socialism. You're supporting it.
Andrew, this is not a comfortable area for any Liberal. It's certainly unorthodox philosophically, but it's a measure of how seriously we take the situation of power prices. I should say that the measures in this bill are absolute last resorts that I hope we never have to rely on.
Okay, all right. Well, strange to me. More after the... Warren Mundine, James Paterson, thank you both. More after the break.